It's been a while since I've done a video on the alternate timeline series, but we will be looking at a rather interesting one today. In my most recent poll on which topic you'd like to see in the next alternate timeline series, a majority of you chose today's topic. Make sure you keep an eye on future posts to be involved in what topic you want to see next. Furthermore, I started streaming Final Fantasy XII on Twitch last Sunday, and we are continuing with the Sunday streams at 9 AM PST. So be sure to follow me there so you can tune in and hang out. And be sure to keep an eye on the TikToks and shorts being uploaded in short form lore content if you find the longer versions boring. As with the other alternate timeline videos, there will be two parts, with the first covering the events before the game and part 2 covering the events after the game begins. Before I start with the video, I would like to put a disclaimer. I have noticed in some comments some disputes in thought process when it comes to the alternate timelines, and I appreciate that, since that is their purpose. It creates a hypothetical timeline that may or may not be accurate, even though I do base it as closely to the quality of the characters and events involved as possible. However, from time to time I do make assumptions on certain situations because of how I see the story going in a certain direction to prevent the video from being too short. At the end of the day, it's content and I still enjoy seeing your perspectives of the video. This is a re-upload because I had to change the plotline a bit, so for those who have already seen the original upload before I removed it, this will mostly be a retelling of the story, but some of the points will be different. In today's episode, we will be looking at what if Seymour had gone through with his mother's dream of them defeating Sin with ANIMA used in the final summoning during the battle. We know based on Seymour's history that he was met with prejudice from a young age, being the only one born of both Guado and human descent, and his father was met with demands to be rid of Seymour and his mother due to him being an abomination. Instead, they were exiled to Bosch, where they would live in isolation. This act would cause Seymour to grow a hatred towards the people of Spira, and his growing nihilistic views of life developed to the person he became in the events of Final Fantasy X. However, there was an outing. His mother, with knowledge of the final summoning ritual from the Guado records, offered to become the final Aeon for Seymour to use and defeat Sin. With his mother being the only person in Spira who showed love to him, they would have shared a bond strong enough for it to likely be that the ANIMA we see in the events of the game is the same final Aeon that Seymour could have used to defeat Sin and become its new core. However, this would have cost him his life. Instead, the transformation of his mother into the Aeon ANIMA left negative effects on Seymour's life. Now that he felt truly alone in the world and continuing to face prejudice from the Spiran population, he grew more sinister and resolved to end the suffering of Spira as he suffered in his childhood, that he plotted to do so by reaching to the highest position in Yevon, to eventually becoming Sin himself in order to meet this ultimate goal. But what if Seymour thought differently during this time the decision was made? What if he instead took the route of redeeming himself to the eyes of Spira by becoming the next High Summoner and defeating Sin? How would the world change as a whole? We will delve into that as we take a look at what if Seymour defeated Sin using ANIMA. There will be no need to explain the process of what happens when the final Aeon is used against Sin because the result has been consistent in every instance. The final Aeon is absorbed by Yevon to become the core of the new incarnation of Sin, and the summoner dies in the process and is posthumously granted the title of High Summoner. There will be no difference in the case of Seymour, who will die in this case while his mother becomes the core of the new Sin. However, this is where the similarities end because this is where the timeline begins. According to the Ultimania Omega translation, Seymour obtained ANIMA 18 years before the events of the game. However, at the time he obtained ANIMA, he would have only been 10 years old, and he would have still mourned the passing of his mother, the only person who loved Seymour. So this would not have been the time where he decided to take the decision of defeating Sin using ANIMA. This would happen much later. In my original upload, I had made the assumption that those who defeat Sin using the final summoning could return as an unsent if they believe they still had purpose in Spira. In fact, this is not an assumption, as Yuna Leska was an unsent who remained in Spira after defeating Sin using Xeon as the final Aeon. So in this timeline, and to clear things up, the Ultimania Omega had actually stated that Seymour had made up his mind to proceed with his ultimate plan 3 years before the event of the game, which he still proceeds to do, but this time adding another element to his plan. In this newly planned scheme, Seymour becomes aware that becoming a High Summoner would help elevate his status in society to further increase his chances of achieving this goal. Despite this elevation in society, however, the events with his father don't change. Jiskel is still skeptical of Seymour's growing hatred, and Seymour responds by killing his father. After defeating Sin and returning as an unsent, the people of Spira would both be skeptical and overjoyed at the fact that a summoner defeated Sin and lived to tell the tale, despite historical accounts that any summoner who used the final summoning has cost them their lives. Seymour would likely use his charismatic front to convince Spira that his well-being after the final battle with Sin was a show of strength and courage in him as a High Summoner. With this, he would likely be granted a very high position in Yevon, if not the title of Grand Maester itself. In fact, due to the overwhelming praise of the population, it is likely that Seymour takes the position from Maester Micah shortly after the final battle, releasing Maester Micah from his duties and sending him to the Far Plane. In the original timeline, Seymour takes the position as a Maester of Yevon and as a representative of the Guado. In this timeline, he still becomes the representative of the Guado, but now as Grand Maester, which does not play a pivotal role until the events of Final Fantasy X begin. In addition, another key element of the story that changes going into Part 2 is that since Seymour defeated Sin using Anima after Braska, the core of the current incarnation of Sin would be Seymour's mother instead of Jet, and she would still have some influence over Sin as she would have been the core for only 3 years. However, it is ironic that he is also an unsent as Grand Maester, very similar to the status of Meister Micah when we meet him in the game. And this is where Part 1 will end. Part 2 will come out in 2 weeks after the release of the lore video on Sin, so you will all have to wait a little longer for the second part, but hopefully you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think of this timeline and what possible changes you have in mind. I would love to see them in the comment section below, as well as leaving a like if you enjoyed this video so I know to make similar content in the future. Subscribe to the channel if you wish to see more lore and gaming related content, and other than that, this is Enzo signing out, and that, as they say, is that.